The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and today we're going to be joined once again by engineer Larry Cooper, who is off of a successful presentation to an ASCE chapter in Florida. This is part of Project Due Diligence, a very important outreach program that's been going on for a number of years. Now it's picking up steam, and it's reaching out to the engineering community, reaching out to the grassroots where the power is behind any organization out there. So just a quick intro for Larry. Larry is a structural engineer and an advisory board member of AE 9/11 Truth. He has 40 plus years of consulting engineering experience related to the structural design and construction of major wastewater treatment facilities and highway and railway bridges. He has a master's degree in structural engineering from the University of Illinois/Urbana. He is also he's a dedicated Project Due Diligence volunteer, which is, of course, sharing the evidence of the World Trade Center destructions, the controlled demolitions of those buildings to engineers all across the country. Let's bring Larry into the stream. Larry, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Well, hello, Andy. Good to see you again.
So, again, I try not to be a broken record on these shows. We just had you on back in January. We talked a lot about Project Due Diligence, but let's say there's an engineer who was so motivated by this evidence that he's tuning in to for the first time. Just briefly remind our audience what Project Due Diligence is doing, what it's all about, and why, how important this is.
Well, okay. Well, what we're doing is we've studied the evidence explaining what caused the World Trade Center, Twin Towers, and Building 7 to collapse. And we're focused right now on Building 7 because that was not hit by a plane, but it was just a total collapse unheard of previous to 9/11. In a few seconds. And what is really new since we started Project Due Diligence is a 4-year in-depth study has been conducted at the University of Alaska by Dr. Halsey with the help of a couple of graduate students. And so coupling that with other evidence that we had already gathered over some time and analyzed we have now put together a rather detailed presentation that shows quite conclusively really what explains the collapse of Building 7. And so I was really, in my most recent presentation was at the SunCoast Branch of ASCE in Sarasota, Florida. There's 22 people present, and it was an interesting mix of people. They ranged in age from probably in their 20s up to people beyond retirement. And it was also an interesting collection of people from the regional standpoint, because being Florida, why this time of the year, there's a lot of what we call snowbirds like myself who are in Florida. And so there were engineers, builders, contractors who are active in Florida now, but who came from places like Pittsburgh and New York and so on. And so some of them were very aware of what happened on 9/11, were at or near the site, and people that have a real strong understanding of building construction, um, building behavior, and I was really quite pleased with how engaged they were in the presentation that I was giving. So
Let me jump in for a second, Larry, because I really want to stress to our viewers, we're talking about project due diligence a lot. And, it's one of those things, we gave a presentation to engineers. And just looking at it superficially, you'll be like, well, you've done that before. Well, yeah, but we weren't doing that years ago. Now we have people calling to the heads of chapters all across this country. And I'm part of it too. And I've noticed that from my own outreach to them, when I just simply lay it out, we have two conflicting reports. One's from NIST, one is from the University of Alaska. We've got to iron out this conflict, figure out what's going on there. We're going to present the University of Alaska report because the mainstream, the organizations such as the ASCE aren't really doing a good job of letting their constituency, or whatever you want to call it, their membership, know about this. People are typically enthused. They say, okay, great, we want to have this presentation. We want to have this presentation. Now, sometimes other forces step in later and stop it, but we are getting them through. We are getting people very interested in this. And I think what this is highlighting and what Larry's experienced, this was a very successful presentation. I want to just lay this out for the audience, talking to 22 members of the ASCE. That means they're all engineers. And Larry gets a standing ovation at the end. I hope I'm not giving away any spoilers in your own narrative here, Larry, but he gets a standing ovation. So what does that tell you about the situation in this country, where you have people who are genuinely interested, at the very least, want to hear about this issue, want to hear, why do these architects and engineers, why are they saying this is controlled demolition? Why is the University of Alaska Fairbanks publishing this report saying that the NIST report is impossible? They genuinely want to hear out of their own intellectual curiosity, but there's forces that don't want them to hear this. That goes to show you where we are in this country, where your average rank and file person out in the street and your rank and file engineer who makes up the grassroots of organizations like the ASCE want to hear this. And when they see the evidence, they're given standing ovations. So, Larry, I'm sorry, please continue. But I want our audience to hear everything about this, because we talk about the problems and the obstacles that we face, and I think it gives a incorrect perception of the situation. And you've got the Tokyo Roses out there embedded in the 9/11 truth movement who like to say, oh, it's all dead, they're getting nowhere. No, that's not true. That is absolutely not true, as Larry's experience now has demonstrated. So we're going to focus on the positive along with the, I don't even want to say negative, I want to say the obstacles, because we expect the obstacles and, we overcome them. We typically do. So, Larry, tell them everything about the presentation. You said there's 22 members who were there, and talk about what you presented. We know it's about Building 7, but talk about some of the points that you went over with them.
Well, okay. I first of all gave them a little bit of background as to it was really built around the Alaska report, and so to start with, pointing out, describing first of all the fundamentals of the structure, the layout, and the structural system, and pointing out how it collapsed so quickly. And then because we had determined some years ago that this was a unique situation, a building has never collapsed like this before. Therefore, it warranted an in-depth analysis to understand what was different this time. And so that brought about the study done by the University of Alaska in the structural engineering department there. And so laid out what it was that that study was about and the approaches that were taken in the study. One, to simulate the structural response um, that the structure experienced as a result of the fires it was exposed to, and then examine the hypotheses, the collapse initiation hypotheses that were developed by NIST, and 3, to simulate scenarios that would produce a model that collapses in agreement with the visual evidence of the collapse. And so then introduce them to the site and the proximity of the building 7 to the Twin Towers, went through a description of how the fire, first of all, what was how much exposure to fire did the structure have, particularly for 13, which is where NIST claimed the initiation of the collapse occurred. So we reviewed the evidence and pointed out that the temperatures that were used by NIST were not consistent with the evidence based on 2 things. One, the amount of time that the fire was heating up the structural elements that NIST claim caused the collapse, and based on metallurgical studies, the temperatures that the steel was actually exposed to. Neither of those were consistent with the temperatures that NIST used in their study. But regardless of that, the University of Alaska went ahead and conducted their analysis of the Building 7 using the same temperatures that NIST used, just to see if, by using NIST criteria, they would end up with what kind of collapse they would end up with. So we looked at the key to NIST explanation was the interior girder being pushed off of a bearing pad at column 79. Well, another problem in the NIST analysis there is that's all based on the floor beams that frame into that girder being fixed at their exterior, at the ends of the beams that are framed into the outside wall. That is an assumption, and they call it an assumption. It's an assumption that is hard to accept as a reasonable assumption. And so part of what the University of Alaska study did is used their computer programs, and they had 2 different computer models that they used in analyzing the behavior of the structure as it was heated up. And that program, both programs, came up with almost the same result, and it was way different than NIST result. It showed that the movement of the girder relative to the bearing pads would have been on the order of an inch versus NIST's claim that it was over 6 inches. That's one problem. Another problem was NIST had sketches of those details included in their report. And if you look at those sketches, they're not drawn to scale. They also do not include all of the details, stiffeners and so on, that are actually part of the bearing detail. So when you take a close look at the movement that NIST claims occurred, it wouldn't be possible for it to happen because of conflicts with the plates that were on the column that would have prevented the girder from sliding off the bearing pad, just a physical obstruction that would have made it impossible. So based on that information, we showed that NIST analysis was unrealistic. But then going through the Alaska, this was, so then an additional analysis was done there. We said, well, okay, let's assume that somehow it did come off the bearing pad, even though it physically could not have happened. Let's assume, okay, what would happen if it did? And so a stiffness analysis was done on the floor 13 framing system and how it impacted floor 12, which NIST claimed that precipitated a progressive collapse as the framing from floor 13 hit floor 12 and then on down. Well, the impact, the calculated impact, was something like 62 kips. But then when you analyze the capacity of the floor 12 connection, which is where the next failure would have had to occur, it was at a capacity of 10 times that. So even if that collapsing of floor 13 to 12 did occur, it would not have caused floor 12 to collapse. And well, let's see, I guess I'm
well, quick question, Larry. Can the inside of a building fall without showing any real signs on the outside of the building?
Well, no. I mean, that's also what was done, is the there NIST contradicts itself in its own report, because if you look, because they also prepared a computer model of the framing system, and based on their assumption that it was a progressive failure starting at column 79, that leads to an asymmetrical collapse. It leads to rather significant distortions in the overall framing system as the building comes down. And you can see that in this own model as far as they show it. They don't run the model to the end, but just with the little bit that they did run, you see rather significant distortions of the framing system occurring. And by running that display alongside the video of the actual collapse of the building, you don't see any perceptible distortions in the actual video. So NIST's own model does not agree with the video. No.
Well, let me ask you something else, because a couple of weeks ago we had Ted Walter and Mick Harrison on the show, and we were talking about all the legal stuff going on with the NIST lawsuit. And one of the arguments they made for trying to get this thrown out of court was that all they have to do is produce a report. It's sort of a runaround of saying, well, it doesn't necessarily need to be accurate. They feel as long as they give you a bunch of verbiage and a big thick volume, that that this is acceptable enough. Just as an engineer, we're going to get very Oprah here. How does that make you feel hearing that we just have to produce a report? I don't know. I mean, all that studying and everything that you did, you must care about your profession. So give us your thoughts.
We as, well, any professional, no matter what your profession is, you have some expertise. And when that expertise relates to the health, safety, and welfare of the general public, we have a professional obligation to explain what really happened. What is it? What do the laws of science, in our case, it's physical science, that explains what happened? And, uh, and that's basically what's behind our work here. Is this was a unique situation, and it warrants in-depth study. And so, yeah, you just can't wave your hand and throw a bunch of dust in the air and say, "Here's the explanation."
Making them sound like some kind of mage or shaman or something. But I mean, that's basically what they are giving you. They're giving you a bunch of smoke and mirrors and make believe magic. Just a show.
Mhm.
That's what they're doing with their reports. We're bringing actual science, and like I know we talk about the same points over and over again because it's the evidence. It's true, and it's all laid out. We've put it in Beyond Misinformation. Ted Walter did a great job with that book. We've laid it out in videos, countless materials that have been distributed, available at our store, or you can download them, whatever. But the evidence is already there. The case was made, for at the very least, having a new investigation years ago. To me, it was a controlled demolition, no doubt about it. But, let the people who are just coming in, do their own investigations. And I think if they're intellectually honest, they'll agree. And that's where it will come out to. But if you listen to authorities, quote unquote, not my authority, people in government, people at these professional organizations, people in the media, they'll say, nobody's interested in this. Your theories were debunked years ago because we said so. Nobody is interested in this stuff. We don't need to have presentations on it. You have no place at any of our functions, much less in society as a whole, if you listen to some of the ways that they state these things. But again, we are showing people with a lot of interest. We are getting standing ovations for Larry here as he brings this evidence to them. I want to know more about this presentation because this is really, I think, a good illustration of where America really is at. I'm not saying that America is out in the streets right now in Washington, D.C., like it's the Million Man March demanding 9/11 accountability. But I think we're at a place right now, so many years after the event, where people will say, yeah, I'll look at the evidence. Yeah, it's possible. Show us what you got. And just from your own perception at this ASCE presentation, what was the vibe overall in the room? Did you feel it was supportive? Was there sort of a trepidation in the air? What did you feel as you walked in there?
Well, walking in there, there was interest. That was pretty evident. I also picked up on. It seems that there was a fair amount of publicity given in advance. People who were responsible for scheduling this apparently were quite excited about it, and they spread the word. And so there was a lot of people that were invited to attend, encouraged to attend. So that
and these were ASCE people too. This wasn't AE 9/11 Truth publicizing it. This were people affiliated with the ASCE at the lower
absolutely
levels.
Right. This was the SunCoast Branch of ASCE. Yes. And these are people who are very active in the community. A lot of the audience was, well, I mean, Florida is a growing state. There's a lot of new people in town, if you will. And these are people who are ambitious and who are interested in what's going on in the world. And so, yeah, so they, well, and for example, following the presentation, I was discussing it with the leader of the group there, the vice president who I was coordinating with, and also there was a woman there who owns a business who is very active in the Rotary Club, and she immediately asked me if I could give a presentation to the Rotary Club. and pointing out that there are architects and engineers who attend their Rotary meetings. And so we scheduled, I will be giving a presentation to the Sarasota Rotary Club in December, after I get back here, back down to Florida. So I'm returning to a more comfortable climate in the north a week. But so obviously she was, and in fact, she raised some good questions during, well, even before I got the Q&A. So she was very much engaged, very interested in what we were talking about. And in the Q&A session following, there was some good questions asked. People asked intelligent questions. They were more on the level of curiosity. I didn't feel any antagonism, any hostility. I felt the entire audience was people who were really there to listen and learn and get answers to their questions. So.
Yeah, well, that's something I wanted to ask you about, was about challenging questions. And, I know when you're in the moment, it's hard to remember every single detail, but what were some of the challenging questions that you received?
Well, let's see. There was one comes to mind, is somebody pointed out that the firms that did the private reports, there was a couple of private reports done on behalf of World Trade Center Building 7 properties, and the insurer and the owner, and those were what they understood were reputable firms that prepared the reports on behalf of their clients, and of course their clients had a particular interest in an outcome. So they were a little puzzled, I guess would be the best way to describe it. How do you account for these, what they understood to be technically very accomplished firms? How do you account for them not coming up to similar conclusions? And I really couldn't give a good answer to that. I did not refute their competence. I may have made a comment referring back to the closing comments I made in my formal presentation regarding ethics and working for clients who have an interest in a particular outcome, and left it at that.
Well, that's a question they should be asking those firms. I mean, all we can do is present the evidence, show where other parties such as NIST and whatnot got it wrong. Obviously, the whole conclusion that it was a fire-induced collapse is wrong. So whatever data or whatever line of thinking that you followed to get to that conclusion must be flawed as well. And it's not to go after individuals or try to besmirch anyone's reputation. But it's a good question if you got a firm that has a good reputation in your mind. And that's not something that we can answer. You got to go to them. You got to say, hey, look, this guy, Larry Cooper, just gave this excellent presentation. He's from a group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, AE911truth.org. Go and look it up. And this is what they're saying about Building 7. What sayest thou to this? And then they come out and give their defense of it if they choose to. That's how science works. So unfortunately, yes, somebody can be right about a lot of things, but when they're wrong, they are wrong. And in this particular case, all of these professional establishments that have spoon-fed you this official story and told you to move on, they are wrong, and more people are waking up to that. Now you got a standing ovation. I can't say that enough. That is very important for our supporters to know and for the other side to know. And what I wanted to ask you here was that if we were just again, this is, a lot of these questions I'm going to ask you today are speculative. That's fine, though. If we were just dealing with the grassroots, if we weren't dealing with higher groups, do you think we'd have a different story? And I'm not just talking about ASCE. I'm talking about at all these professional organizations that meet and talk about such matters. Do you think if we were just dealing with the grassroots, that this would be a different perception of this issue, that it would be more openly discussed?
Absolutely. Right. Because at the grassroots level, why, yeah, people are interested. They're curious. If there's something they feel they can learn by listening to a presentation, they're eager to do it. I mean, people in the middle of their career, they're always wanting to learn as much as possible. And if there are problems, yeah, they're interested in the different perspectives on the problem. So if they were left alone, if they had autonomy in making their decisions about whose presentations they were going to listen to, why, I think many doors would fly wide open. But people, not just engineers, but people in general, if something is perceived to be controversial, if something is perceived as, well, maybe this isn't really, my boss may not think too kindly about me getting involved here, or people up the chain, yeah, they might shy away from it. So it takes people who are independent minded, people who feel secure, people who have a long-term perspective. They're not just concerned about the moment, but they want to gain an in-depth understanding and feel a strong sense of responsibility to society. So it's
Well, nothing is controversial until some authority tells them that it's controversial. I think more people are open to questioning things. And if it's a dumb issue, let's say it revolves around a celebrity or something, and it's like, oh, you got one side or the other, this guy or his wife, they want people arguing about that stuff, I believe, because it keeps them distracted, and it's great at for click ratings and that stuff. There's nothing controversial about taking a side in that. It's like, oh, you're from team A or you're from team B. That's not controversial. But if somebody came in and said, if you take this one person's side over the other, if some authority said that, more people would hesitate. That's what happened with this issue. And I'm so sick of hearing this talking point, and that's all that it is. I have no doubt that there's like some clipboard that these people refer to, and it's like, oh, okay, say this. Oh, you only have 3,500 architects and engineers. There's so many in the world. Oh, you have failed. You've only got these 3,500. Well, first of all, that's pretty darn good, considering the circumstances that we are in. All right, it should not be Andy Steele bringing this information to you every week. It should be CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, until we have some resolution. I would love that. I would love them to take this job over for me. I'd tear all this down and turn it into an art studio. That's exactly what would happen. But unfortunately, they are not, because their job from day one has been to stifle this. So a lot of architects and engineers don't even know this issue exists. A lot of them don't even know a third tower fell on September 11th. I've experienced that with architects at AIA. I've experienced that with engineers. A lot of them don't even know that there was a third building. What the heck is up with that? I mean, you have this building that falls straight down, symmetrical for the first time in history just because of fire, and a lot of people in the profession don't even know about it. Your comments?
Yeah, well, yeah. In fact, before I began my presentation, I asked the audience a question: how many of you were aware of the collapse of Building 7, the third high-rise building at the World Trade Center, prior to being informed of this presentation? I think it was 7 people raised their hands, 7 out of the 22. So basically a third of the audience heard about it. The other 2/3 had not heard about it. But also, I think, relative to what you were just bringing up, Andy, I think there's what also comes out in the presentation is some news, some broadcast clips on the day of 9/11. Some prominent broadcasters were describing what they were seeing, and course, I recognize one of the voices. I think it's Dan Rather, who was, as I mentioned to the audience, if you're close to my age, you might even recognize some of these voices. But they were describing on 9/11 what they were seeing as looking like controlled demolition, as looking like a building imploding, explosives. That those words, that language stopped after September 11th. You didn't hear it anymore. What does that tell you? That suggests that there was some pressure coming down from on high through the network's management, owners, to change your language. There's certain language we're not going to use when we're describing this event. Because they went basically all the major networks, those that are responsible for presenting the news in an informed manner, were not doing it.
I can remember I can't remember. I saw it later in coverage of September 11th from ABC News. This was later on in the evening to bring on I believe it was a structural engineer, describe why the Twin Towers collapsed. So they were ready to go with an explanation. Now, they didn't have the full explanation at that point, but they were throwing out hypotheses. Never say that word correctly. But but Peter Jennings says, do we have a lock on why that third building came down? Now, it's impossible to speculate on what he was actually thinking as he said this, and the man is deceased now, so we can't ask him, but I did detect a hint of suspicion. You know, he wanted to know why that third building came down. Wasn't just wasn't accepting that it went down, brushing it. So obviously something was going on in his brain, and it's unfortunate that we don't have these questions asked over again. It's unfortunate that this was such a huge event and such a shocking and tragic one that a lot of people fell into line and never really pushed the envelope with digging deeper. We just accepted the story that we were told, and then the whole focus was on going to war and all of that stuff. But again, we're doing the job that the media can't. So my point is, 3,500 architects and engineers, that's pretty darn good for the work we have been doing, considering that we have no help from the corporate media except from them attacking us. And it's kind of sick if you think about it. Like, them attacking us is the only help, quote unquote, that they give us through publicity. And we're getting our message out there. It's because of the efforts of people here at AE 9/11 Truth that these presentations are happening. And of course, for those great ASCE people in the grassroots who are scheduling these presentations and putting them on. And it seems like with the ASCE and some leadership efforts to stifle this, it seems like they're stifling the will of their membership. What do you think about that?
Well, they obviously are, certainly. And so then you have ponder the question, why? And I guess the best conclusion I can come to is somehow, let's first of all understand that at the grassroots level and on up the ranks quite a ways, people they're doing the best job they can. They're practicing engineering the best they can. They're interested in doing a good job. But something happened at the upper levels related to 9/11. And somehow the ASCE, selected ASCE folks got involved. And they basically supported the narrative that we're now hearing. And so you wonder, okay, how did that happen? Because in general, I think 99% of engineers are ethical people, and they want to be ethical people. But you have to understand, I think, that for civil engineers, governmental agencies are our primary clients. That's our number one client, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level. Most of our work we do for governmental agencies. And of course, you want to, you're always supportive of your clients. So you have that mindset, and your relationship with your client is to wanting to support them. Now, we have an obligation, according to our code of ethics, to put public health and safety above the interest of our clients if there's a conflict. And so, how does one slide across that barrier, if you will, if that's the right term, is an interesting exercise in psychology, I guess, and how does one slide into that position? But anyhow, somehow it happened. Once it happened, then of course no one wants to be accused of having violated their ethical standards, having violated the laws of physics as we know them. And so they go into self-protection mode. And they go into denying, and they become defensive. And now you have to push that on when reality starts coming up the chain, then the top starts pushing down, because that's going to expose something as having happened in our profession that should not be happening. And we don't want that exposed. And engineers are not unique. I mean, we see that happening in many other institutions and so on also. So we have an interesting psychological, sociological problem to deal with. And that's part of our challenge, us to deal with the laws of physics. Oh, okay, now we got to deal with how people behave, human behavior.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's our biggest obstacle. I've always said it. We're past the science arguing phase. I mean, I wish we were. We still have to make the science arguments, hence why PDD exists. But it's really a sociological problem. I just want to say this to any engineers out there who may be flirting with the issue or whatever, however you want to say it, watching this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with coming out and saying, look, I didn't really look into the evidence before. And there actually is something here. It doesn't mean that you're any less of a person, any less of an engineer. I can actually remember my brother said that he worked with a guy who said that the government did 9/11 and all this stuff. And AE doesn't get into that, just to establish that. But, the guy was saying that. He said there was something wrong with the way the towers came down. And I was just like, well, yeah, your friend's obviously smoking something or whatever. But I hadn't looked into the evidence. It just sounded far-fetched. And I sympathize with that, actually. When you first hear this said, it's like, how would they get away with something like this? But when you actually look at the evidence, I can't see how these towers could have come down without pre-placed explosives. So now I'm on the complete opposite side. Everybody was there at one point. Most people were there at one point. So there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I made some snap judgments in the beginning, and I should have looked at this a little bit more closely. Why aren't we doing something with this? And it gets into the importance of these efforts. And I want to say this for the 9/11 truth movement. What we focus on here is 9/11. I really believe it's the linchpin to everything that's upsetting us right now here 20 years after the event took place. And for some people, they might be upset about this world event, and other people might be upset about this other event. And so that's why we don't focus on the, quote, conspiracy of the week here. That's why we don't, look into other aspects. Every once in a while, we might shine a spotlight on something, but it's very rare. We focus in on what our mission is here, and it's actions like this, what Larry did. Again, a standing ovation at the end of his presentation from people who are not in the 9/11 truth movement. It's one thing if you're doing a presentation to people who are already on board, but when you're actually going out to these chapters, not preaching to the choir, and you're getting standing ovations, number one, it says something about America, where people are. It's a good sampling. But it also shows how important the work of people like Larry, like Roland, like John and Zaida and all the other people, Seth McVeigh, that we've had here from Project Due Diligence is, and why we need to get behind this. Because, like, you know, I could do a show for every successful presentation that we have, but it would just sort of be repetitive. Be like, oh yeah, and they clapped at the end, and you got some good questions, and they got the evidence out there. So we're not going to talk about it all of the time, but it's happening. This is what AE 9/11 Truth is doing behind the scenes. And so, you know, when we're on here talking about the stuff that's more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like in the spotlight, the NIST lawsuit and all of this, what's going on elsewhere that we're not talking about is these presentations, these great achievements that are being done. And we always need help with this. And the great thing is people like Larry are the ones that do the presenting of evidence. So you don't have to do that. All you got to do is get it set up for them. If you're interested in doing that, let me know. I'm not interested in people that want to lecture me and say, oh, you should be talking about the reaches of power and secret society. I don't want to hear about any of that. The main key is to get Larry into a presentation somewhere, either in Michigan or in Florida, wherever he currently is at that point in the year, or Roland or whoever. We've got people all over the country practically, and everything is done virtually now too, for the most part. And we can do virtual presentations, but we need people to make the calls. So if you want to do that, and you can follow instructions, and you got to follow instructions, because otherwise it's dysfunctional, and stick to the plan, then let us know, and we'll put you to work in that. It's so gratifying to get presentations set up for these great folks and hear about how successful they were. There's nothing better than success, no greater motivator, and I've always believed that. So anyway, that is why I think Project Due Diligence is so important. It's like Rocky Balboa punching at Apollo Creed's ribs here, eventually making him all weak and unable to throw the punches at the end. That's a movie reference, but that's why it's so important to me. Why do you think this is so important after what I just said?
Well, I think people just need to give some thought to what happened following 9/11. How has the world changed since 9/11? And I frequently hear references made to, well, when we're dealing with different situations, catastrophes, and make reference to 9/11. Well, what were the catastrophes that followed 9/11? What did 9/11 have to do with things that followed subsequently? And, we can argue about cause and effect, but there is a relationship. And just exactly what that relationship is, that's a whole nother debate to have by informed people. But it's pretty clear that as a result of 9/11, well, first of all, let me say that, when you come to the conclusion that, when you accept the conclusion that there was explosives planted in the buildings, because that's the only plausible explanation for explaining. Let's talk particularly about Building 7 now. That's the only plausible explanation for what brought that building down. That means somebody installed those explosives in advance of 9/11. That means there was some planning done. That means there's more to the story than we're led to believe. We're led to believe that 9/11 happened, and then bad things happened after that. Well, but 9/11 was planned. Who was involved in that? And who was involved in that planning is clearly different than what we're led to believe. That it doesn't fit with the common narrative. So we need to understand that, because that has had a huge impact on the United States, on the political atmosphere in this country, on how people from other parts of the world were perceived. And don't forget, there was a couple of wars. the war against Afghanistan within a couple of weeks, I believe, and then 2 years later against Iraq. And that was all related to 9/11. Now, cause and effect is a whole other discussion, but there is definitely a connection. I think everyone would agree to that. So we need to understand that. So it had a huge impact on the world then, and it still is having a huge impact. And we need to understand that so we can prevent these sorts of happenings in the future for the betterment of our society, for the betterment of the people around the world, as far as that goes, not just the United States, but especially here. And so.
Yeah, and everything that you do has an impact. I mean, I've seen it myself after my mom called C-SPAN. Yeah, the old lady that called them out for censoring questions. That was my mom. But the next day, because she embarrassed them so badly, you could see the congressman gets a cue from off. This was Chris Smith. Gets a cue from off stage, and he's like, "Okay, I'm getting this now." And then he gives like a long 10-minute answer or something to it. Obviously, we weren't satisfied with that either, but you have an impact when you reach out and do things. And sometimes it's the things that people don't know about behind the scenes that have the biggest impact. And imagine if we get it acknowledged that the towers were brought down and controlled demolitions on that day. I don't care, how evil you think the system is, they are going to be scared to try to pull something like this off again. Transparency and truth will be the trend. It will be the standard with which America operates, not because these people have seen the light and their souls are reborn or anything like that. It's going to be fear. It's going to be fear of irrelevancy, fear of repercussions. They are not going to be pulling the same kind of stuff again, at least for a little while. I know history is all full of tyrants and bad things happening, and in the future there may be some new thing, but in the immediate aftermath, for I would say next 50 to 100 years, 9/11 will be held up as the standard of something to never let happen again. They tried to, they held it up as the standard, never let it happen again. We need all the civil rights killing legislation. We need to invade these countries to never let it happen again. Well, that never let it happen again will change. We need to have further transparency from our government. We need to have a lock on what they're doing, further control over them, so that it never happens again. It would be a renaissance, a golden age. And aren't you sick of all the drama that our government stirs up all over the world? I mean, I'm saying this out to the audience. Aren't you sick of it? Wouldn't you like us to focus on the arts again? Focus on cool, big projects like going to Mars or something? Have that be like what's on the news, something that we can be proud of again? Not have all this drama infecting our lives. And it's so important to stay on topic. And I understand it's difficult with so much going on in the world. I'm concerned about the situation with Russia and all of that, and the Ukraine, and the fact that both sides have nuclear weapons. It makes me nervous seeing the headlines. But I stay focused here, and because this is what we do here at AE 9/11 Truth, and basically this is what's going to pull everything out from under what we're concerned about now. And it's what we know. It's what people like Larry know about. Why, Larry, I want to hear from you. I've talked long enough. Why is it important to stay on topic and stay narrowly focused on our mission?
Well, because if we go off the rails and we start trying to connect this with some other issues, it becomes very distracting. We need to stay on message, stay on our discussions of what is relevant to 9/11. And when you start getting off into other issues, then you start raising questions about, well, how much credibility do you really have? Because we're focused on the science related to the collapse of the buildings. And that's where we have to stay. Because when it gets into going beyond that, I mean, we've established what happened basically, fundamentally. There's a lot more in-depth studies that can be done, but we've established fundamentally what has happened. And so now we need to move ahead based on that. And let's not go wander off into the woods and talk about other things just because you think that the government, and I guess I would emphasize too, I don't like to use broad terms like the government or even NIST, because within government, within NIST, 90% or more of the people there are doing the best job they can. They're good, honest people trying to do the best job they can. But something happened in this case. That's clear. There's a problem. So let's stick with what we know and not get into wild speculation. And let's not make broad statements about the government or even about NIST. Let's talk about the people involved in this project and their actions and inactions, and what elements in the government might have been involved. But we have to stay away from making generalized accusations, I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Right. And the way I look at it, I mean, for myself, I've resolved, now look, it's impossible to not have opinions on things. I mean, you live and breathe in this world, you see the headlines, and you're affected by things, you have opinions on them. But other things going on are well represented by other people. I mean, my participation in it is not going to mean much, right? But there's not a lot of people right now who do the weekly show for AE, and so that's where my focus is. That's where this is where I work, and this is where I think we have the best chance of making a difference. I really believe that. And 3,000 people died on that day. That is one of the most pressing issue in my view, because when we expose this, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when we expose this and when we get this acknowledged, it is going to change everything for all the reasons that I listed before. So I believe that whoever we're up against, whoever was responsible for this, whoever perpetuates the cover up, and I'm not talking about one person, there's probably a lot of people. I think they want everybody being broken up like a jigsaw puzzle, running into all sorts of different directions, arguing over this factoid, over that factoid, onto other aspects of 9/11. I think they tried to sow unrest and create that out there so that we can't all get behind this one thing. That's been a record throughout history of government actions to disrupt activists and things like that. I'm not going to accuse anyone, but I'm just saying that they don't want us unified on this one topic. They want us to lose interest and move on and not keep on harping on these same points. I'm proud to keep on harping on these same evidence points and continuously talking about this, because we are the telltale heart beneath the floorboards, driving the murderers insane. You better believe they don't like this broadcast. They don't like what we do here, which is all the more reason to keep on doing it, and why you out there need to support people like Larry. Get behind Project Due Diligence. If you can't donate, then donate your time. You got like a Monday or Tuesday off from work, contact me. I will tell you what to say. I will tell you who to call. And you say, hey, we've got a great presentation, 2 reports, NIST report, Building 7 report from University of Alaska. They're in conflict with each other. This isn't the script, folks. I'm just kind of coming up with it off the top of my head. But how about we have a presentation? A lot of them are eager to do it too. A lot of them want to get that requirement of their office filled and be like, yeah, what about in May or June? When are you available? It's just really exciting too. Really exciting feeling. Again, there's no greater motivator than success. So you can consider being a part of that. And if you're a good worker, stay on topic, and then we'll be happy to have you. So that's it.
Yeah. Well, we do have cookies for attendees too. We get PDH credits. In
there
fact,
you go.
In the Florida presentation, 8 people signed up to get PDH credits. So yeah, so there is a Benny for engineers who are working, who need to earn X number of professional development hours every year or every 2 years. Why, come to our presentation and you'll earn some credits and you'll learn something.
Right. And if anybody in any professional organization leadership is watching this and going back to the drawing board, how do we stop this from happening? Do you really want your legacy to be that? How to stifle open discussion of ideas? Like when you look into the eyes of your grandkids, do you want to say, that's what I contributed to the world? So why not, instead of trying to plot against us and using this as intel to show as we inform our supporters of what we're doing on how to stop us, why don't you just let the discussion happen and see where it goes? If you really don't believe us, if you really think we're full of beans, use a clean word, then let's have the debate. Come on, what do you got to hide of? You don't want your legacy to be about stifling discussion of open ideas and evidence. That's not what people grow up wanting to do. We are out of time, Larry. I had a fun time today, though, and thank you so much for what you're doing, and keep on doing it, as I know you will. And thanks to the audience out there for watching.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Enjoyed it. Have a good day. Okay.